Hello and good morning. You're watching Daybreak live on A News and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. US-Iran strikes intensify after American patrol helicopter is downed in the Strait of Hormuz. Disorder breaks out in Northern Ireland after a Sudanese man is charged over a knife attack. And Ebola cases rise to nearly 600 in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with an urgent call to restrict travel. First, this morning, tensions in the Gulf have escalated after the US carried out strikes on Iranian military sites following US President Donald Trump's claim that Iran downed a US Army helicopter near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran later retaliated early this morning and struck the US Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. Here's more on that report.
The United States says it has completed strikes on Iranian military sites near the Strait of Hormuz after President Donald Trump accused Iran of downing a US Army Apache helicopter. In a social media post, Trump stated that the helicopter had been patrolling over the strait and that both pilots were safe and uninjured. He said the United States had to respond. A US official said the Apache was brought down by a one-way Iranian attack drone, though it was not immediately clear whether it was deliberately targeted. US Central Command said its forces hit Iranian air defense systems, ground control stations and surveillance radar sites with precision munitions. It described the operation as a proportional response to recent attacks on US forces and commercial ships in regional waters. Iran has not claimed responsibility for the helicopter incident. After the US strikes, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned that Tehran would not leave any attack unanswered and told Washington to leave the region. Iran's Revolutionary Guards later claimed attacks on US military targets in Bahrain, Kuwait and Jordan. Bahrain told residents to seek shelter after warning sirens sounded, while Kuwait said its air defences were engaging hostile aerial targets. Iranian state media reported explosions near the Strait of Hormuz, including Keshem Island, Bandar Abbas, Sirik and Jask. It also said 2 water reservoirs were hit in southern Iran, disrupting supplies in nearby areas. The escalation follows recent exchanges between Iran and Israel and has added uncertainty to US-Iran talks over a possible deal to end the conflict and reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe. And of course, we stick with this top story, which has also been going over across this morning. When we go to the New York Times, it says, US launches strikes on Iran. Tehran claims attacks on US fleet. So just as you saw in our top story, we know that Iran has launched retaliatory strikes against the US this morning against its fleet in Bahrain. It comes after the US actually launched its attacks on Iran. And the President Donald Trump has said that he's accused the country of shooting down a helicopter over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the American forces began strikes around 5 o'clock EST time, which actually is Tuesday. This Tuesday, the following day. No, it's not. They did this at 5 o'clock on their time Tuesday, which reached Tehran area around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock this morning. Now, the US Central Command said that the mission is in proportional response to unjustified Iranian aggression. And according to US officials, Iran has used a drone to launch the attack. But it's not clear whether Iranian drones was deliberately attacking the helicopter or an unnamed US official is what they said to a CBS News partner. Now, according to the US news website Axios, the new strikes focus on Iranian defense and radar systems, and Iranian state media reported that explosions were heard along the coast of the Persian Gulf as well. Now, in an interview with ABC News, Trump blamed Iran for the new US strikes, and Iran's foreign minister, as we put in that report, also mentioned saying that the country will leave no attack or threat unanswered. Now, where does that leave us right now? We do have a guest later on in the program to kind of bring us all up to speed in this week. Things have escalated quite rapidly over the weekend, and now today with strikes from the US over in Iran. Pakistan is still very much the mediator between the two countries, but we will find out more information later on in the program. And just to add as well into this, Israel has also struck Lebanon on Tuesday, and Iran had said that any attack on Lebanon, whether or not southern Lebanon or Beirut, it will be met with an equal force. But nothing has been reported as yet in relation to that, but we will give you an update as soon as we have it. Okay, now let's move to our next headline this morning, and that's on the France 24 website in relation to Afghanistan. Now, dozens of Afghan men protest government crackdown on women, police accused of firing shots. So what's happened? Several people were injured in the city of Herat after Taliban security personnel reportedly opened fire to disperse a small protest that was organized to support women who were arrested for dress code violations. Now, Taliban authorities in Afghanistan cracked down on the protests over the dress violations on Tuesday, with multiple witnesses reporting shots being fired. Now, we know that between 100 and 150 Afghan men had reportedly gathered in the western city of Herat to show their solidarity with many of the women who had been arrested last week for going out in public without a full chador, cloak or face covering burqa. Now, a spokesperson for the Herat police said that people attempted to gather and create tensions under the pretext of protesting issues related to observance of the hijab dress code. Now, the protest had reportedly been organised through social media, where residents were called upon to defend the rights of our sisters, is what the message said. And such civil action is quite rare in Afghanistan since the withdrawal of US troops in 2021. Then the Taliban came in and returned to power and imposed these strict rules what they would regard as strict interpretation of Islamic or Sharia law, which has very strict rules in relation to how women dress and how they are perceived out in public. Now, the regulations include draconian restrictions on women and girls, including bans on education and beyond. Now, United Nations has now stepped in, and their investigator on human rights in Afghanistan has said he was alarmed by excessive use of force against seemingly peaceful protesters in Herat today, and said those responsible for the violence should be held accountable. Okay, let's go to our next story this morning, and that's on Deutsche Welle website, and it's a story that we also reported on yesterday, and that is the bear that is causing a bit of havoc in Japan. So Japanese city captures black bear after multi-day hunt. So Japanese authorities have sedated and captured a black bear days after it was spotted roaming around the city near Tokyo, and a veterinarian fired a tranquilizer gun at the bear. We do have some photos and a video coming up, so you can see exactly some footage about that. But another bear was also filmed chasing people in the Fukushima area and still evading officials, and as Japan still deals with a rising bear encounters in the local area. Now, attacks currently have reached record levels in 2025, with 238 bear attack victims reported to the Environment Ministry, including 13 deaths. And large parts of rural Japan, especially in the mountain area of Tohoku, are traditional habitats for black bears, but they rely heavily on seeds such as acorns and beech nuts. Both with the recent poor harvest, it's now bringing the bears out, venturing into the residential area in search for food. Now, on Tuesday, it took officials an hour and 40 minutes to capture the bear after it was identified in its location. Now, this video coming up, we're going to show you right now, actually shows some of the footage that has been circulating around the internet in relation to this story. If we just take a look now. And he runs into an office, as you can see there, and actually breaks in through the glass. There we are, that picture of one of the Japanese offices near Tokyo there. And then we have the bear running back out again. Now, just to add, the unprecedented sighting forced the closure of a number of public primary schools, 94 in total, and middle schools. And officials said that there were possibly 2 bears in the city and urged residents to keep their doors and windows locked. just to make sure they were kept safe. As you saw there was an individual who was running away from the bear. Thankfully, that individual doesn't seem to be harmed deeply by this particular black bear, but it's something that Japan is trying to get a grip on. Okay, now let's turn to our next story this morning, and that's on the Guardian website. I was going to say a different website there. It's on the Guardian website in relation to NASA. Now, headline is Earth's first Starfleet. NASA reveals Artemis 3 crew and project's next steps. So NASA has unveiled the 4 astronauts that will make up the Artemis 3 crew. And unlike the mission's predecessor, Artemis 2, if you remember, not that long ago, this crew will not go to the moon this time round. Instead, they will fly to low Earth orbit to test rendezvous and docking maneuvers with 1 or 2 lunar landers. Now, these maneuvers will be used during a future moon landing, which NASA hopes to attempt in 2028. And just as a reminder, in April, NASA's Artemis 2 mission sent 4 astronauts to the vicinity of the moon for the first time in more than half of a century, which we covered extensively on the program. And as you can see here, these are the 4 astronauts that you can see coming up on your screens that have been selected for Artemis 3. Now, just to add that the mission was historic, the Artemis 2 mission was historic because of what the crew looked like. Mr. Glover, one of the astronauts, was the first African-American man to fly near the moon, and Miss Koch, she was the first woman. Jeremy Hansen was the 4th Artemis 2 crew member from a different nation, from Canada. So really was historic in relation to where all these astronauts were coming from or representing. Now, of the Artemis 3 astronauts, Dr. Douglas is African American, and Mr. Rubio, who is also another astronaut, part of that Artemis 3 crew, was the first astronaut of Salvadorian descent to go to space. And the other astronaut, Mr. Parentano, who is Italian, is the European Space Agency's first representative on the board of Artemis program mission. I must add here that there are no women on the crew, and it's something they don't really want to hone in on. One of the comments from Jared Isaacman said that I don't think anyone should be reading into that at this moment in time, but it is very evident that there are no women on this next mission that they're calling Artemis 2. Okay, now let's turn to the rest. That's the end of the morning press roundup for the headlines. Now I'm going to take a short break, but when I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories this morning. And we head first over to the United Kingdom, and a man is in serious condition over a knife attack in North Belfast, which has caused protests and violent outbursts from the local community. For more on the investigation and the wider reaction, we're joined by our correspondent Zainab Farzadeh.
A man was hospitalized in serious condition after a knife attack in North Belfast, in an incident that has added to a wider wave of concern around violent crime and recent high-profile attacks across the UK. Police say the victim, a man in his 40s, suffered significant injuries to his face, eyes and back during the assault late on Monday night in the Kennett Avenue area. A kitchen knife was recovered at the scene. A 30-year-old man, a Sudanese national, has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and remains in custody. Officers have declared the case a critical incident, but say it's not being treated as terrorism at this stage. Footage of the attack has circulated widely on social media, showing members of the public intervening before police arrived. Officers have praised those bystanders, saying their actions may have helped save the victim's life, while urging people not to share the video further. Assistant Chief Constable Ryan Henderson has called for calm, saying the incident will understandably cause fear and anger in communities, but warning against any disorder or retaliation. The stabbing comes at a sensitive moment following a series of violent incidents and public debate around knife crime and safety in the UK, with police increasingly concerned about misinformation and online speculation fueling tensions. Political leaders have condemned the attack as shocking and have also urged restraint as investigations continue across Northern Ireland. Zainab Farzadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Following on from the attack, tensions have escalated in Belfast with anti-immigration protests and scenes of unrest across parts of the city. Let's take a look at this report.
Unrest has spread through parts of Belfast after a knife attack late on Monday night left a man seriously injured. Hundreds of anti-immigration protesters took to the streets on Tuesday, with some setting vehicles on fire and blocking roads. Firefighters worked to extinguish a burning bus, while police, ambulance crews and other emergency services responded to scenes of disorder. The protests followed the charging of a 30-year-old Sudanese man over the knife attack in North Belfast. Police said the victim suffered serious wounds to his neck and head, with earlier reports also describing injuries to his face, eyes and back. The case is not being treated as terrorism. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer described the stabbing as sickening after video of the attack was widely shared on social media. Police in Northern Ireland have appealed for calm and increased patrols amid calls for further demonstrations online. The unrest comes at a time of heightened tensions in Britain over violent crime, immigration and asylum policy. Northern Ireland also saw anti-immigration rioting last year after anger over an alleged sexual assault.
Staying in the UK, an historic public response is pushing under-16 social media restrictions to the top of the government's agenda, while Prime Minister Keir Starmer faces domestic pressure to implement an Australia-style ban. The proposals are already triggering pushback from the US Embassy over free speech concerns. Reporter Stuart Smith reports from London.
The national consultation on social media use that closed last month had around 120,000 responses, according to the UK Technology Secretary, which would make it the second largest response to any government consultation in history since the one on equal marriage. That was reported at the Prime Minister's weekly cabinet meeting, according to his spokesperson. It's a private meeting between the Prime Minister and government ministers, but what's released by the spokesperson can offer clues as to the government's public priorities. In this case, Keir Starmer appears keen to demonstrate his government is listening to the calls for action from parents, educators, the police and civil society on the harms of social media and is ready to implement potential solutions. These could range from restrictions on social media use for children to more blanket measures like an Australia-style ban for under-16s. But the US Embassy in London has pushed back on that idea, saying it's worried about freedom of speech and disproportionate compliance burdens on American companies. In response to that, the Prime Minister's spokesperson says Keir Starmer is focused on what's right for families here and now and into the future. It comes as he tries to convince colleagues to back him in any leadership competition that could arise, especially if current Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, is elected next week to the National Parliament, from where he could launch a leadership challenge against the Prime Minister. In the UK, the governing political party can change its leader, and therefore the Prime Minister, between elections. But any candidate has to receive enough support from Labour lawmakers, and the incumbent Prime Minister says he's going to fight to win. Stuart Smith for A News in London.
Pope Leo XIV has led a vigil attended by more than 40,000 people at Barcelona's Olympic Stadium on Tuesday as part of his visit to Spain. The event combined prayer, music and personal testimonies, including an account from a teenager whose father attempted to kill her mother. During the gathering, the Pope reflected on domestic abuse and violence against women, a theme he addressed in the following remarks.
So many crime reports, even today, reflect a toxic climate in family relationships marked by abuse and oppression, and in particular by violence against women, which unfortunately often leads to femicide. We are all called to address this dramatic reality, both personally and as a society, because we are responsible for confronting it in all its dimensions. If violence exists, if selfishness prevails, if even love among family members turns into hatred, we must question the dynamics of our society, the culture of individualism, and the temptation of violence, but not God.
Europe's ambitions for greater defence independence have suffered a major setback. A flagship project designed to develop a next-generation fighter jet has collapsed after years of political and industrial disagreements, raising fresh questions about the future of European defence cooperation. Our Anita Sharma has details.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where the collapse of Europe's most ambitious fighter jet project deals a major blow to Emmanuel Macron's vision of closer European defense integration. France and Germany abandoned plans to jointly develop a next-generation combat aircraft under the Future Combat Air System, or FCAS. That ends nearly a decade of work on a project once seen as the future of European defense cooperation. It was launched by Macron and former German Chancellor Angela Merkel back in 2017 as a symbol of a more independent and militarily capable Europe. Instead, it fell victim to years of disputes between France's Dassault Aviation and Airbus, which represents German and Spanish interests. The companies failed to agree on leadership, access to intellectual property, and work sharing, leaving Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz unable to break the deadlock. For years, Macron argued that Europe must achieve greater strategic autonomy, the ability to defend itself without relying so heavily on the U.S., while FCAS was meant to prove Europe could build the next generation of military technology together. Instead, critics will see its collapse as evidence that Europe still struggles to translate political ambition into industrial reality. At a time when Russia remains a security threat and Washington demands Europe do more for its own defense, the collapse of FCAS raises fresh doubts about Europe's ability to develop critical military capabilities on its own. Now, some elements of the program may survive, including a secure combat cloud linking aircraft and drones. But the fighter jet was the project's centerpiece. Its demise may become one of the clear symbols of Europe's defense ambitions crashing before ever leaving the runway. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now, the European Commission is preparing for its 21st package of sanctions against Russia, targeting key sectors including energy, banking and the fishing industry. The measures are intended to increase pressure on Russia's effort in Ukraine. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said existing sanctions are already having a significant impact on the Russian economy.
Today we are putting forward the 21st sanctions package. We focus on the sectors with the highest impact, that is energy. It is financial services and crypto, trade, and this time it includes for the very first time fisheries. And we are banning the entry of former Russian combatants into the European Union.
Ukraine and Latvia signed a drone agreement on Tuesday during a Baltic summit in Estonia. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the deal after meeting Latvian Prime Minister Andris Kulbergs on the sidelines of the gathering. The agreement aims to strengthen joint defence capabilities and expand co-production of unmanned aerial systems while sharing Ukraine's battlefield experience with its partners.
Your team, we are very happy.
Bulgaria's defense minister said Sofia would no longer provide arms to Ukraine after Ukraine army and called for Moscow and Kyiv to return to negotiations. He said the war would not be resolved on the battlefield and called for Moscow and Kyiv to return to diplomacy. The decision comes after Bulgaria and Ukraine signed a 10-year security cooperation agreement in March. The deal includes defense production, intelligence sharing and energy cooperation. Staying in the war with Ukraine, 3 explosions struck the gas pipeline near the Kyzyl in Russia's Dagestan region on Tuesday, triggering a major fire. Regional emergency officials said the incident was caused by a loss of pressure in the pipeline, with flames reaching up to 15 meters high. Around 140 people were evacuated from nearby areas, while firefighters spent more than 2 hours bringing the blaze under control. No deaths or injuries were reported. The United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, France, New Zealand and Norway have announced coordinated sanctions targeting individuals and networks accused of financing, enabling and carrying out settler violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. The countries said the measures were introduced in response to rising settler violence and record expansion of Israeli settlements, warning that further action could follow if the situation does not improve. The joint move reflects growing international concern over developments in the West Bank and increasing pressure on Israel to address violence linked to extremist settler groups. Israel's foreign ministry strongly condemned the sanctions. Staying on Israel, Israeli airstrikes on the Lebanese city of Tyre have killed 8 people and injured at least 32 others, according to reports from Lebanon. The strikes hit residential areas on Tuesday, including the Al-Masaken neighborhood, and Israel, who also targeted other parts of southern Lebanon. After the bombardment, the Israeli military ordered evacuations from parts of Tyre, including Palestinian refugee camps and the city's historic Christian quarter. It said Hezbollah members had entered the area. The United States has added several major Chinese companies, including Alibaba and BYD, to a Pentagon blacklist over alleged military ties, a move Beijing has condemned as discriminatory and coming just weeks after the landmark US-China summit. Our correspondent reports from Beijing.
The U.S. Department of Defense has designated dozens of Chinese firms as Chinese military companies, among them technology giant Alibaba, electric vehicle maker BYD, and search engine Baidu. Washington says that the 3 companies are affiliated with China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, which oversees the country's technology and industrial policies. The updated list now includes 188 firms, up from 134 previously. Companies on the list will be barred from consideration for U.S. defense contracts under rules set to take effect later this month. Alibaba has rejected the designation, saying there is no basis for its inclusion and has vowed to take legal action. China's embassy in Washington has condemned the move as discriminatory. The expansion comes less than a month after President Trump met Chinese leader Xi Jinping in Beijing for a 2-day summit aimed at easing trade and technology tensions between the 2 countries. Manir Makhtoom, A News, Beijing.
Now turning to the continent of Africa, and the Ebola outbreak in Central Africa is becoming increasingly difficult to contain. Health authorities are warning that shortages of resources, insecurity and growing international travel restrictions could complicate efforts to stop the virus from spreading.
Health authorities in Africa are facing growing challenges in containing the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda, as the number of confirmed cases has surpassed 600 and the death toll has climbed above 100. According to the Africa Centres for Disease Control and Prevention, the vast majority of infections have been recorded in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where dozens of new cases continue to be reported. Uganda, meanwhile, has not recorded any new confirmed infections in the latest reporting period. The Centres for Disease Control warns that response efforts are being hampered by serious operational constraints, including insecurity, shortages of ambulances and medical supplies, deteriorating health facilities, and poor road infrastructure. In some affected areas, health centres lack clean water, protective equipment, and decontamination materials. Officials have also highlighted community mistrust as a major obstacle to containment efforts, complicating surveillance, contact tracing, and public health interventions. The United States has urged European countries to consider travel restrictions for people who have recently visited affected countries after Washington imposed its own entry measures covering the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Uganda, and South Sudan. US officials say the restrictions are intended to prevent the spread of the virus, while the Africa CDC has expressed concern that travel measures imposed despite international health guidance could negatively affect response operations.
And maintaining the outbreak is something people in Kenya also want after a planned US Ebola quarantine facility in the country has become the center of growing controversy, triggering protests, legal challenges and debate over public health and national sovereignty. Here's more.
Police in Kenya fired tear gas and detained several protesters on Tuesday as opposition continued to grow over a US-backed Ebola quarantine center near the town of Nanyuki. Many residents opposed the project, arguing that Kenya should not bear the risks linked to an Ebola outbreak affecting parts of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda. Moreover, tensions over the plan escalated last week, leading to the deaths of 2 protesters.
Is that correct?
The center is being built at Laikipia Air Base near Nanyuki. It would be able to accommodate up to 50 people. U.S. officials say it is intended for Americans who have been exposed to Ebola but are not showing symptoms. Anyone who develops symptoms would be transferred elsewhere for treatment. The project has also sparked a legal dispute. A Kenyan High Court judge has twice ordered the government to halt construction and operations at the site. Lawyers challenging the plan say the government failed to meet the latest court deadline. However, President William Ruto has defended the project, saying last week that his administration is doing the right thing. The United States says it is aware of the court challenge and is working with Kenyan authorities to address concerns. Washington has also pledged $13.5 million to support Kenya's Ebola preparedness efforts. The facility is being planned as Ebola cases continue to rise in eastern Congo and Uganda, where more than 500 infections and over 100 deaths have been reported since the outbreak was declared last month. U.S. military aircraft have continued bringing personnel and equipment to the site despite court orders aimed at stopping the project, with additional temporary structures appearing at the airbase. Kenyan officials say the center could also serve Kenyan and foreign nationals, although U.S. authorities have not confirmed that.
Now to a quick break. When I return, we'll have a global discussion and regional stories, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now turning to our top story this morning, and escalations in the east. Pakistan has called for peace diplomacy and to pursue that after retaliatory strikes over the weekend. Joining me now to further discuss this is Dr. Hamza Iftikhar, assistant producer of political science in Lahore. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Iftikhar, I just want to talk about very recent escalations that we've seen overnight today, because the US has struck Iran over the course of this morning because of a US helicopter that was downed. Where does this leave us, and are we back to square one?
That's a question that's on everybody's mind, and it does definitely put the conflict in a more dangerous phase, because the US and Iran, as you said, are both exchanging direct fire. And they're only negotiating through intermediaries, right? So the immediate trigger has to be the ongoing conflict, obviously, in Lebanon as well. And it kind of means that that is a big part of the equation. It means that we're not back to square one, because it seems like it's a very much of a action-reaction being used on the side of the negotiations, which are also happening at the same time through intermediaries like Pakistan. It doesn't necessarily mean that the war is uncontrollable, because it seems that all parties seem to think that if any part of a strike or a military action can be used to stronghold their position at the negotiating table. So if they see them kind of losing out on the table, they might use something like this to kind of just use to their advantage, and that's something that we are likely to see. What it also tells us that Lebanon is very much a big part of this agreement, which means that the Iranians think that the Lebanese cannot be ignored. And if anything is to be kept going on with the war in Lebanon, this particular deal cannot go through. So it does make diplomacy really hard, but I wouldn't think that it's back to square one. I think there's still definitely momentum, and all sides talking about stopping this from boiling out seems to be a good kind of indicator of that.
Well, just on what you said, especially bringing Lebanon into it, and what we saw over the weekend with Israel striking Lebanon, as it has always been doing, and then Iran deciding to get involved and strike northern Israel. there was a whole back and forth. US President Donald Trump got involved, told them to stop. We need to go back to the negotiating table. And now this has happened, which also looks like, a hypocritical act, because he said, don't retaliate, don't retaliate. He's now also decided to retaliate. And also Israel has hit Lebanon on Tuesday. Things are very much becoming more tit for tat than diplomacy. So what can Pakistan really do? How can they step into this current mess of striking and retaliatory strikes in all of this, in order to bring some kind of, partners and countries to the table to agree on a peace settlement?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is definitely a perception of the double standards. What is interesting, though, is to get a U.S. president for the first time telling Israel to back off, especially vis-a-vis Iran. And in Lebanon as well, the U.S. president, when the Israel started attacking Lebanon, there were reports through sources within the White House that the U.S. president was not happy with Netanyahu, and that seems to indicate that the U.S. is trying to manage Israel's escalation while still maintaining pressure on Iran. Obviously, they don't want to lose out on the negotiating table, so it seems like they're definitely going to maintain any indication of a military prowess in the region, especially the Strait of Hormuz, but they're also doing their best to kind of tell Israel not to get this escalated to a point where there is no table whatsoever to go to. And this is where Pakistan comes in. Pakistan's literally only job is to make sure there is a table where everybody can come to. And so far they have been successful, and I would say even with these escalations, they are still successful because the table remains there and everybody is able to have an access to it. So the job of intermediary is to make sure that the diplomatic channels stay open. And we also see if a day ago, Lebanese military chief was visiting Pakistan as well. And so you kind of see that the channel is definitely being used, not just open, but being used, which is a positive thing, especially in a conflict where the action escalation kind of tactic seems to be the norm. But on the other hand, you need kind of cool heads to prevail. And I think they can only do that if there is a third party that is not seen as kind of has a vested side, one or the other, but is primarily neutral and just wants to impose or maintain peace. And I think that's what Pakistan's job, and it's doing pretty well. And I hope that it continues to do well, and everybody able to hash out an agreement on the table instead of a battlefield.
Yeah, well, and just on that, Vice President J.D. Vance, US Vice President J.D. Vance has spoken out and said that, negotiations are still going ahead, that things are moving in the right direction. And Trump has repeatedly said, look, we're really close to a deal, we're very close, we keep talking. As you mentioned, he doesn't want Israel's escalations to impact what those talks could actually, go into. But we still seem to be at, not necessarily a stalemate, but at a very high conflict area just because of what we're seeing right now. And this huge impact of what Trump keeps talking about when it comes to nuclear weapons program for Iran, which seems to be the place where there is a lot of pushback on. Where can these conversations and discussions really progress from here? What could be the compromise, and what could Pakistan do in relation to that as well? As you mentioned, they've got the table out there. Is there anything more that Pakistan could play in this?
Definitely. I think what you said is absolutely on the point that, Vice President of the United States, President of the United States both think that the deal is very close. Now, a lot of the people may take this as an indication and specifically a message to the markets, so the markets can calm down a little bit, the price of oil and everything else. But they wouldn't say something this big if there was no progress on the deal as well. So it seems to be that they're referring to a framework being signed, kind of like this memorandum of understanding that, okay, we have chosen to solve this out on a diplomatic level. What the problem seems to be are the specific frameworks that what you just mentioned are pertaining to the nuclear agreement and what to do with the enriched uranium that is existing in Iran, right? So, and also the frozen assets and the regional security and all of that. So when it comes to the specifics, I feel like the next step should be to get an agreement done without the specifics in there. So at least there is an intent being shown and guaranteed on part of everybody, and then it can be followed up by more specific agreements and frameworks on each of the specific categories that they seem to be not sure about where to go. But yeah, there's a lot of things. Obviously, there's a lot of variables. I don't necessarily see that they're close in terms of a final agreement, but they seem pretty close on signing something to indicate that we're heading towards that kind of an agreement.
And do you think with heading towards that agreement is very far off from obviously things stopping in relation to strikes and the region being involved? Obviously, we know that Bahrain was hit. The Gulf states are very much unhappy with how Iran has been using, them as a target because of its ties to the US. What can other countries in the Gulf or outside of that, Europe, China, Russia, do to either also speed up negotiations and diplomacy to bring the two countries together and really kind of hone in on something? We know that Pakistan is doing its absolute best, but things seem to still be quite slow. Is there anything that can speed this up?
Well, that's the complicated thing about geopolitics. I don't think there's anything particular that can speed this up. It primarily depends on what the costs are for each of the concerned parties. So if one of the parties thinks that they can actually sustain this level of uncertainty and get through it, and by just passing of time, have more cost being applied to the other party, they'll just do that, right? If they see that they're losing out slowly, this is becoming a status quo, nobody's paying attention, they might escalate some things to kind of put everybody's spotlight back into the conflict, including news media. So what usually then in this case happens is if other countries, as you said, what they can do is they can start contacting and getting involved in this particular conflict by reaching out to the main parties and asking them to, get close to the deal. Because the more of the actors show interest into this, the better it is. Obviously, it becomes something of a world issue, which it is right now. But if countries independently reach out to both parties and they try to motivate them and they try to figure out a way to move this forward instead of just one or two countries, then that'll be, I think, a better way to go about it, and may slightly, push this a little further.
And just on that and everything, what is Iran's strategy now in this? Obviously, it's fighting on two fronts, with Israel on one side and the US on the other. How are they managing all of this, and where do they want things to end?
I think they are also definitely interested in an agreement, but they don't want to lose out in that agreement. And they seem like they still hold pretty solid cards, which means that they won't easily give up on whatever their strongest demands are, which seems to be obviously the stop of the attacks in Lebanon. So if the attacks don't stop in Lebanon, it seems like Iran is not willing to back down and even move towards any sort of an agreement. And this is what this is essentially the cause of the recent escalation. So they seem to be in still the good position that they have been since day one, which is having control over the Strait of Hormuz. This recent escalation on their part also seems to indicate that they want to show the world and also the US that the Strait of Hormuz is under their control, even if there is somewhat a passage of certain vessels, but the Strait of Hormuz still remains under their control, and they are relevant and an important geopolitical party with a decent amount of power.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Iftikhar, for coming onto the program and explaining that. It's something that the whole world is paying very close attention to, so thank you for explaining that to our audience this morning.
Thank you.
Now we stay in Tehran because it has rejected a new round of EU sanctions, accusing European governments of double standards and defending what it says are its sovereign rights in the Strait of Hormuz. Now we go to our correspondent, Turash Ralilu, who reports from Iran.
The Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal Affairs, Kazem Garibabadi, has strongly condemned the move by the Council of European Union to sanction Iranian individuals and an entity in relation with the Strait of Hormuz, linking the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. In a post on the platform X, he stressed that Iran does not attach any value to the political and hypocritical move and will continue its strategy of maintaining sovereignty and exercising sovereign rights over the Strait of Hormuz. His statement was made after the European bloc imposed on Monday sanctions on a Revolutionary Guards Navy unit and 2 Iranian individuals, accusing them of supporting measures that restrict navigation through the maritime corridor. Gharibabadi branded the European states as major violators of the Iranian people's rights because of their deliberate silence regarding the US naval blockade of the Iranian southern ports, which he termed an act of war. Addressing the legal status of the crucial global shipping lanes, the senior Iranian diplomat reminded that Tehran is not a party to the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. According to the Iranian official, the legal regime emphasized by Iran in the Strait of Hormuz is innocent passage based on customary international law and observance of the coastal state's maritime safety and security considerations. Innocent passage is a concept in law of the sea that allows vessels to pass through the territorial sea of another state, subject to certain restrictions. It applies to the entire territorial sea up to at most 12 nautical miles from coastal baseline. Refuting the move by the European Union's legislative body, the Iranian official also noted that unilateral coercive measures do not create law. Rather, they can be the source of international responsibility for their authors. The US blockade of Iran's ports and Tehran's grip over the Strait of Hormuz have created a gridlock that is neither peace nor raging conflict, as has been the case in weeks of trading attacks between the Iranian and US militaries amid a fragile ceasefire. The standoff has also endangered the energy security of the European countries already facing backlashes of the Russia-Ukraine war. Turaj Shiralilu from Tehran for A News.
Now there's some good news for Kyrgyzstan, who is no longer on the European Union aviation safety blacklist, ending restrictions that had been in place since 2006. Officials in Bishkek say the move reflects years of reforms in civil aviation. We have more from our correspondent Fariza Kalimazerna in Almaty.
Kyrgyzstan has been removed from the European Union's aviation safety blacklist, ending nearly 2 decades of restrictions on the country's airlines. The decision was approved unanimously by all 27 EU member states, and according to authorities in Bishkek, all airlines certified in Kyrgyzstan have now been removed from the EU air safety list. For many people in Kyrgyzstan, the decision carries practical meaning. Since the ban was introduced in 2006, traveling to Europe often meant longer routes, extra costs and transit through neighboring countries, most commonly Kazakhstan. And many they see the decision as long-awaited news. The restrictions we introduced in 2006 when the European Commission banned 27 Kyrgyz passenger and cargo airlines from operating across EU airspace. Brussels said at the time that Kyrgyzstan's aviation oversight system did not meet international safety standards. Media reports at the time suggested that the decision may also have reflected a broader tightening of aviation safety measures in Europe following several international reviews and major air disasters, including the 2004 Flash Airlines crash near Egypt's Sharm el-Sheikh, which killed 148 people, most of them French citizens. Officials in Bishkek say the country's removal from the blacklist follows years of reforms in civil aviation, including changes in safety regulation and oversight aimed at aligning Kyrgyzstan's aviation system with international requirements. Authorities now hope the decision will eventually open the door to new routes, stronger transport links with Europe, growth in international air travel, and an increase in tourism. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, E-News.
It's time for a break. Now, when I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Stay with me. Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and if you're just joining me, I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at your headlines. US-Iran strikes intensify after American patrol helicopter downed in the Strait of Hormuz. Disorder breaks out in Northern Ireland after a Sudanese man is charged over a knife attack. And Ebola cases rise to nearly 600 in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with an urgent call to restrict travel. Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe, and we head first over to France 24 website, and their headline this morning states dozens of Afghan men protest government crackdown on women, police accused of firing shots. So what's happened is that several people were injured in the city of Herat after Taliban security personnel reportedly opened fire to disperse a small protest organised in support of Afghan women arrested for dress code violations. Now, Taliban authorities have cracked down on a protest over women's dress code violations on Tuesday, with multiple witnesses saying that there was reports of shots being fired. Now, there were between 100 and 150 Afghan men who had gathered in the western city of Herat to show their support and solidarity with the dozens of women who had been arrested for going out in public without a full chador cloak or a face covering burqa. Now, a spokesperson for the Herat police said that people attempted to gather and create tensions under the pretext of protesting issues related to the observance of hijab dress code. Now, the protests had reportedly been organised through social media, where residents were called upon to defend the rights of our sisters, is what the actual message said. Now, such civil action is actually quite rare in Afghanistan, where since the withdrawal of US-led forces in 2021, the Taliban has returned back into power and imposed a set of rules that are strict interpretation of the Islamic or Sharia law, which regulates women's dress code, which is quite draconian. It restricts women and girls in relation to not having an education beyond primary school and making sure that they are fully covered when out in public. So these protests is something that these men are definitely trying to raise awareness for, especially for the women that were arrested in relation to that law. Now we turn over to our next story this morning, the next headline, which is on the Deutsche Welle website, and that's in relation to a roaming bear, because Japanese city captures black bear after multi-day hunt. We had this on the program yesterday when the bear was caught on CCTV. But Japanese authorities have now sedated and captured the black bear days after it was spotted roaming around the city near Tokyo. Now, a veterinarian actually fired the tranquilizer gun at the bear, and another bear was filmed chasing people in the Fukushima area and evading officials. Japan has been dealing with a rise in bear encounters, and attacks have reached a record level in 2025 with 238 bear attack victims. And as you can see on your screens just now, we're just playing out a video that shows one of the black bears chasing a local man around. And then heading into this building, an office building there. Now, large parts of rural Japan, especially in the mountain areas of Tohoku, are traditional habitats for the Asiatic black bears, and they rely heavily on certain foods, which has been seeing a poor harvest, which is actually bringing the bears to venture outside of their normal domain and to residential areas in search of food, as you can see here. Now, the unprecedented sightings has meant that a number of schools have had to close in the local area, including primary and middle schools as well. And officials said where possibly two bears in the city have been seen, urged residents to keep their doors and their windows shut because of that. Quite scary there. Okay, well, so that's that headline. Now we turn over to the Guardian website in relation to our top story this morning, because Tehran launches retaliatory attacks on Bahrain and Kuwait as it happened. So Iran, we know, has launched retaliatory attacks against the US on the US Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, and it comes after the US launched strikes on Iran after President Donald Trump accused the country of shooting down a US helicopter over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the US strikes happened around 5 o'clock on Tuesday their time, which is actually around 1 o'clock, 2 a.m. Iran Baku time, which is when this all started to kick off. And the US Central Command said the mission is in a proportional response to an unjustified Iranian aggression. And according to US officials, Iran was said to have used a drone to launch the attack, but details are still coming in as there's been no word of confirmation as to if this was deliberate or something that was a mistake. Now, according to US news website Axios, the new strikes focus on Iranians' defense and radar systems, and Iran state media reported that they heard explosions along the coast of the Persian Gulf as well. In a telephone interview with ABC, US President Donald Trump here blamed Iran for the new US strike, saying that it was because of what they did in relation to downing the US helicopter that they've had to retaliate and do that. And in response, Iran is saying that they will leave no attack or threat unanswered. Now let's go to our report that has more on this story and some more detail to go into exactly how this all escalated over the last 24 hours.
The United States says it has completed strikes on Iranian military sites near the Strait of Hormuz after President Donald Trump accused Iran of downing a US Army Apache helicopter. In a social media post, Trump stated that the helicopter had been patrolling over the strait and that both pilots were safe and uninjured. He said the United States had to respond. A US official said the Apache was brought down by a one-way Iranian attack drone, though it was not immediately clear whether it was deliberately targeted. US Central Command said its forces hit Iranian air defense systems, ground control stations, and surveillance radar sites with precision munitions. It described the operation as a proportional response to recent attacks on US forces and commercial ships in regional waters. Iran has not claimed responsibility for the helicopter incident. After the US strikes, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned that Tehran would not leave any attack unanswered and told Washington to leave the region. Iran's Revolutionary Guards later claimed attacks on US military targets in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan. Bahrain told residents to seek shelter after warning sirens sounded, while Kuwait said its air defenses were engaging hostile aerial targets. Iranian state media reported explosions near the Strait of Hormuz, including Keshem Island, Bandar Abbas, Sirik, and Jask. It also said 2 water reservoirs were hit in southern Iran, disrupting supplies in nearby areas. The escalation follows recent exchanges between Iran and Israel and has added uncertainty to US-Iran talks over a possible deal to end the conflict and reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Israeli airstrikes on the Lebanese city of Tyre have killed 8 people and injured at least 32 others. That's according to reports from Lebanon. The strikes hit residential areas on Tuesday, including the Al-Masakin neighborhood, and Israel also targeted other parts of southern Lebanon. After the bombardment, the Israeli military ordered evacuations from parts of Tyre, including Palestinian refugee camps and the city's historic Christian quarter. It said Hezbollah members had entered the area. The United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, France, New Zealand and Norway have announced coordinated sanctions targeting individuals and networks accused of financing, enabling and carrying out settler violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. The countries said the measures were introduced in response to rising settler violence and record expansion of Israeli settlements, warning that further action could follow if the situation does not improve. The joint move reflects a growing international concern over developments in the West Bank and increasing pressure on Israel to address violence linked to extremist settler groups. Israel's foreign ministry strongly condemned the sanctions. We head back over to the UK, and a man is in a serious condition after a knife attack in North Belfast, which has caused protests and violent outbursts from the local community. For more on the investigation and the wider reaction, we now go to correspondent Zainab Faridse, who had brought in this report.
A man was hospitalized in serious condition after a knife attack in North Belfast, in an incident that has added to a wider wave of concern around violent crime and recent high-profile attacks across the UK. Police say the victim, a man in his 40s, suffered significant injuries to his face, eyes and back during the assault late on Monday night in the Kennett Avenue area. A kitchen knife was recovered at the scene. A 30-year-old man, a Sudanese national, has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and remains in custody. Officers have declared the case a critical incident, but say it's not being treated as terrorism at this stage. Footage of the attack has circulated widely on social media, showing members of the public intervening before police arrived. Officers have praised those bystanders, saying their actions may have helped save the victim's life, while urging people not to share the video further. Assistant Chief Constable Ryan Henderson has called for calm, saying the incident will understandably cause fear and anger in communities, but warning against any disorder or retaliation. The stabbing comes at a sensitive moment following a series of violent incidents and public debate around knife crime and safety in the UK, with police increasingly concerned about misinformation and online speculation fueling tensions. Political leaders have condemned the attack as shocking and have also urged restraint as investigations continue across Northern Ireland. Zainab Faridse, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Following on from this, the attack has brought tensions which escalated in Belfast with anti-immigration protests and scenes of unrest across parts of the city. Here's this report.
Unrest has spread through parts of Belfast after a knife attack late on Monday night left a man seriously injured. Hundreds of anti-immigration protesters took to the streets on Tuesday, with some setting vehicles on fire and blocking roads. Firefighters worked to extinguish a burning bus, while police, ambulance crews and other emergency services responded to scenes of disorder. The protests followed the charging of a 30-year-old Sudanese man over the knife attack in North Belfast. Police said the victim suffered serious wounds to his neck and head, with earlier reports also describing injuries to his face, eyes and back. The case is not being treated as terrorism. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer described the stabbing as sickening after video of the attack was widely shared on social media. Police in Northern Ireland have appealed for calm and increased patrols amid calls for further demonstrations online. The unrest comes at a time of heightened tensions in Britain over violent crime, immigration and asylum policy. Northern Ireland also saw anti-immigration rioting last year after anger over an alleged sexual assault.
Now, the Pope Leo XIV has led a vigil attended by more than 40,000 people at Barcelona's Olympic Stadium on Tuesday as part of his visit to Spain. The event combined prayer, music and personal testimonies, including an account from a teenager whose father attempted to kill her mother. During the gathering, the Pope reflected on domestic abuse and violence against women, a theme he addressed in the following remarks.
So many crime reports, even today, reflect a toxic climate in family relationships marked by abuse and oppression, and in particular by violence against women, which unfortunately often leads to femicide. We are all called to address this dramatic reality, both personally and as a society, because we are responsible for confronting it in all its dimensions. If violence exists, if selfishness prevails, if even love among family members turns into hatred, we must question the dynamics of our society, the culture of individualism, and the temptation of violence, but not God.
The European Commission is preparing its 21st package of sanctions against Russia, targeting key sectors including energy, banking and the fishing industry. The measures are intended to increase pressure on Russia's war effort in Ukraine. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said existing sanctions are already having a significant impact on the Russian economy.
Today we are putting forward the 21st sanctions package. We focus on the sectors with the highest impact, that is energy, it is financial services and crypto, trade, and this time it includes for the very first time fisheries, and we are banning the entry of former Russian combatants into the European Union.
Ukraine and Latvia signed a drone agreement on Tuesday during a Baltic summit in Estonia. The Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the deal after meeting Latvian Prime Minister Andris Kulbergs on the sidelines of the gathering. The agreement aims to strengthen joint defence capabilities and expand co-production of unmanned aerial systems while sharing Ukraine's battlefield experience with its partners.
Very important. Your team, we are very happy and we to see the
Staying on this topic, Bulgaria's defence minister said Sofia would no longer provide arms to Ukrainian army and called for Moscow and Kyiv to return to negotiations. He said the war would not be resolved on the battlefield and called for Moscow and Kyiv to return to diplomacy. The decision comes after Bulgaria and Ukraine signed a 10-year security cooperation agreement in March. That deal includes defence production, intelligence sharing and energy cooperation. China has launched the world's first wind-powered underwater data center off the coast of Shanghai as the country looks for greener ways to meet the soaring energy demands of artificial intelligence. Our reporter Abahayat Jafarova has more from Beijing.
China has switched on the world's first wind-powered underwater data center, marking a new step in efforts to support the country's rapidly growing AI industry. The facility is located off the coast of Shanghai, about 10 kilometers from shore and around 10 meters below the sea surface. Developed by high cloud technology and China Communications Construction, the data center is powered by a nearby offshore wind farm, combining renewable energy with a unique underwater design. Officials say the project consumes more than 20% less electricity than conventional land-based data centers. A key reason is cooling. Data centers generate large amounts of heat, and in traditional facilities, cooling systems can account for up to 40% of total power consumption. In Shanghai's new underwater center, surrounding seawater helps cool the surface naturally, significantly reducing the need for energy-intensive air conditioning systems. The design also lowers freshwater consumption, an increasingly important issue as the global expansion of artificial intelligence drives demand for larger and more powerful computing facilities. The project reflects China's broader push to expand AI infrastructure. It follows the launch of the country's first commercial underwater data center in Hainan in 2023, but the Shanghai project is the first to combine underwater computing technology with offshore wind power. The total investment in the project reached 1.6 billion yuan, equivalent to roughly $220 million. Abahayat Jafarova, A News, Beijing, China.
Turning to the continent of Africa, and the Ebola outbreak in Central Africa is becoming increasingly difficult to contain. Health authorities are warning that shortages of resources, insecurity and growing international travel restrictions could complicate efforts to stop the virus from spreading.
Health authorities in Africa are facing growing challenges in containing the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda, as the number of confirmed cases has surpassed 600 and the death toll has climbed above 100. According to the Africa Centres for Disease Control and Prevention, the vast majority of infections have been recorded in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where dozens of new cases continue to be reported. Uganda, meanwhile, has not recorded any new confirmed infections in the latest reporting period. The Centres for Disease Control warns that response efforts are being hampered by serious operational constraints, including insecurity, shortages of ambulances and medical supplies, deteriorating health facilities, and poor road infrastructure. In some affected areas, health centres lack clean water, protective equipment, and decontamination materials. Officials have also highlighted community mistrust as a major obstacle to containment efforts, complicating surveillance, contact tracing, and public health interventions. The United States has urged European countries to consider travel restrictions for people who have recently visited affected countries after Washington imposed its own entry measures covering the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Uganda, and South Sudan. US officials say the restrictions are intended to prevent the spread of the virus, while the Africa CDC has expressed concern that travel measures imposed despite international health guidance could negatively affect response operations.
We move over to West Africa, and Senegal is drawing attention to the growing strain in its Atlantic coastline, where marine resources are essential to daily life, food security, and the national economy.
Senegal is marking World Oceans Day with warnings that overfishing, pollution and climate change are threatening the coastal communities that depend on the Atlantic Ocean. Fishing is one of the country's most important industries, supporting around 600,000 people along the coast and supplying both local and export markets. The sector contributes more than 3% to national GDP and provides around 53,000 direct jobs, with many more linked to artisanal fishing and processing. Fish and seafood are also central to Senegal's diet, accounting for about 43% of animal protein consumption. Coastal fisheries make up most of the country's catch and remain vital to exports and employment, but environmental groups say they are under increasing pressure. The Coastal Fisheries Initiative is working with Senegalese stakeholders to improve fisheries management, restore mangroves, and support more sustainable fishing practices.
Over to the US, and NASA has named 3 American astronauts and 1 Italian astronaut for the next Artemis mission, which is due to launch late next year. The 4-person crew will carry out a spacecraft docking demonstration in the low Earth orbit, testing lunar landers developed by SpaceX and Blue Origin for the first time in space. The mission is designed to prepare for future astronaut landings on the moon under NASA's Artemis program. The crew will be the final planned mission before it attempts to return humans to the lunar surface. We head over to East Asia, and there are probably 101 ways to cook rice, but in Cambodia they have found another creative way for the carbohydrate, and that's through art. Tom Kim Eng, better known as Aisha, creates detailed paintings using individual grains of rice, placing each one carefully onto a painting sketch before coating them in glue. This former sticky rice seller has ventured into a different field and turned culture into art. Her desire was for people to see Cambodia's rice works and products and inspire the next generation.
I created the Rice Art project aimed at encouraging the younger generation, instead of spending too much time on their phones, to turn to rice art, putting the rice grain into paintings. By doing that, they can have fun and they can slowly adapt to love art that would be good for their future.
Imagine doing that grain by grain. So much attention to detail is needed. Well, now we turn over to the world of sport, and tennis star Serena Williams was back on the court after a 4-year break, doing the thing she loves the most, playing tennis. Now, the 44-year-old played doubles alongside Canadian teenager Victoria Mboko at the Queen's Club Championships in London, winning the game, and after winning, she marked her performance with a modest, well, I'll let her tell you the rest.
Oh my God, I think I would give myself a, what do you think? C minus?
I mean, it's funny because there was moments in the match where we were kind of just like, oh, this isn't going great, or, you know, we kind of, it's very self-critical, but I understand, you know, it feels like it was far from our level a little bit, but yeah. Don't be too hard on yourself.
Yeah, so overall, I think it was decent.
Yeah.
I agree. Serena, don't be too hard on yourself. A C-, my goodness, and she won. Just imagine what an A would look like, but we know that she is a star on the tennis court. But those are all of the stories for this morning. Thank you so much for joining me, but please make sure you stay tuned to A News as we have further updates throughout the course of the day on some of those key stories happening across the region and the globe. Take care, and I'll be back on your screens tomorrow morning.